The dust cloud rose from the horizon as Josephine Dawson clutched her tattered carpetbag to her chest, the stagecoach having deposited her unceremoniously at the edge of Wallace, Montana territory in the summer of 1876. Her once fine blue dress was wrinkled and stained from the grueling 2-week journey, and the letter promising her a new life as a schoolteacher felt like lead in her pocket, a weight of false hope. Josephine shielded her eyes against the setting sun, surveying the dusty Main Street with its weathered buildings. Wallace wasn't much a handful of businesses, a small church with a crooked steeple, and plenty of saloons doing brisk business as the day wound down. The letter from the town council had promised a teaching position, housing, and a fresh start. But as she discovered upon arrival, the previous schoolteacher had returned unexpectedly, and there was no position to be had. "The council sends their regrets, miss," the portly mayor had said, not quite meeting her eyes before hurrying away, leaving Josephine standing alone outside the town hall with nowhere to go and less than $5 to her name. Now the evening chill was setting in, and Josephine fought back tears. 22 years old and utterly alone, she had fled Philadelphia with nothing but promises from Wallace for employment, promises from Richard that he would follow her west once he'd settled his affairs. Both had proven as substantial as the dust swirling around her boots. "You look like you could use some help, madam." The deep voice startled her. Josephine turned to find a tall man standing a respectful distance away. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes that studied her with genuine concern. "I'm fine, thank you," she lied, straightening her shoulders despite the exhaustion weighing them down. The man stepped forward, and in the fading light she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 30, with tanned skin that spoke of long days in the sun. His clothing was practical, a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, sturdy trousers tucked into scuffed boots. Not a gentleman by Eastern standards, but there was a quiet dignity in his bearing. "Pardon my forwardness, but you don't look fine," he said, his voice gentle despite its rumbling depth. "Stage just left you here," Josephine hesitated. Her mother had always warned about speaking to strange men, but her mother wasn't here in this dusty frontier town with night approaching. "Yes, I was promised a teaching position that no longer exists." Something like anger flashed in the man's eyes. "Mayor Hollins," she nodded. "That man's promises aren't worth the air they ride on." He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the edges. "Owen Riley. I have a ranch about 3 miles outside town." "Josephine Dawson," she replied, extending her hand out of habit before quickly withdrawing it, remembering she was no longer in Philadelphia drawing rooms. But Owen caught her hand gently in his calloused one, giving it a brief, respectful shake. "Miss Dawson, I don't mean to presume, but you need a place to stay, and my sister works as a cook at the Wildflower Inn. It's respectable, and she might be able to help you find work." Josephine studied him, looking for any hint of deception. In Philadelphia, she had learned the hard way that charming smiles could mask the worst intentions, but Owen Riley's expression held nothing but straightforward concern. "I haven't much money," she admitted, hating the words even as they left her mouth. "Sarah, my sister, she'll work something out." The owner, Mrs. Tillman, is fair-minded. A gust of wind swept down the street, carrying the promise of a cold night. Josephine clutched her carpetbag tighter and made her decision. "Thank you, Mr. Riley. I would appreciate that very much." Owen nodded and gestured toward a solid-looking building down the street with a wooden sign bearing a painted wildflower. "I'll introduce you, then be on my way. I've got cattle that won't feed themselves." As they walked, Josephine felt the stares of townsfolk, curious about the newcomer with the Eastern clothes and the exhausted eyes. The knot in her stomach tightened. She had come west to escape whispers and stares, only to find herself the subject of new ones. "Don't mind them," Owen said quietly, seeming to read her thoughts. "New faces are still rare enough to cause a stir." The Wildflower Inn was clean and modest, with polished wooden floors and simple furnishings. A plump woman with Owen's same warm brown eyes emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, her face breaking into a smile at the sight of him. "Owen, Didn't expect you in town today." Her gaze shifted to Josephine, curious but kind. "Sarah, this is Miss Josephine Dawson." She arrived today expecting the teaching position Hollins promised in writing. Sarah's expression darkened. "That man." She shook her head and extended her hand to Josephine. "Sarah Riley Winters, pleased to meet you. Let me guess you need a place to stay and maybe some work." Relief washed over Josephine. "Yes, if it's possible." "Well, Mrs. Tillman just mentioned this morning that we could use another pair of hands, what with the cattle buyers coming through next week." Sarah looked Josephine up and down. "Ever worked in an inn before?" "No, but I'm a quick learner and I'm not afraid of hard work." The words came out stronger than Josephine felt. Sarah nodded approvingly. "Good, that's all that matters out here." She turned to her brother. "You heading back to the ranch now?" Owen settled his hat back on his head. "Need to. Got that mare about to foal and Jenkins is still nursing that broken arm." "Come for dinner Sunday," Sarah instructed, "and bring some of those apples. Your trees are bearing better than the ones in town." Owen's smile was brief but genuine. He tipped his hat to Josephine. "Miss Dawson, good luck to you. Sarah will take good care of you." As he turned to leave, Josephine called after him, "Mr. Riley, thank you." He paused in the doorway, the setting sun casting his silhouette in gold. "Out here, we help where we can, Miss Dawson. Someone once did the same for me." With that, he was gone, striding down the street toward a rangy bay horse tied in front of the general store. Sarah touched Josephine's arm. "Come on, let's get you settled. You look dead on your feet." The room Sarah showed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the back garden. After the noise and discomfort of the stagecoach, it seemed like luxury to Josephine. "Rest up," Sarah told her. "Tomorrow will come soon enough and Mrs. Tillman will want to meet you." Alone in the quiet room, Josephine finally allowed her composure to crumble. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the letter from Richard, reading it for perhaps the 100th time. "My dearest Josephine," it began, full of promises to join her once he had settled his father's estate, promises of marriage and a new life far from the scandal that had touched her family name in Philadelphia. But the words rang hollow now. The letter was dated 2 months ago, and there had been nothing since. She folded it carefully and placed it back in her pocket. Then she removed the letter from the Wallace Town Council, with its elaborate promises now proven false, and slowly tore it to pieces, letting the fragments fall into the small wicker wastebasket. Tomorrow she would begin again. She had no choice. The morning dawned bright and clear, and Josephine woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town, the distant lowing of cattle, the clatter of wagon wheels on packed dirt, voices calling greetings as shops opened for business. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress, attempted to tame her unruly auburn hair into a neat bun, and made her way downstairs. Sarah introduced her to Mrs. Tillman, a stern-faced widow with shrewd eyes who asked few questions about Josephine's past but many about her willingness to work. "We serve breakfast and dinner to our guests and to respectable townsfolk who pay for the privilege," Mrs. Tillman explained. "No alcohol served here, they can go to the saloons for that. We keep the cleanest rooms in 3 counties, and I mean to keep it that way." "Think you can help with that, Miss Dawson?" "Yes, madam," Josephine answered firmly. "Sarah says you're educated. Can you keep accounts?" "Yes, I can. I helped my father with his business ledgers for years." Mrs. Tillman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did you now? Well, that might prove useful. For now, though, you'll help Sarah in the kitchen and with the rooms. $6 a week and your room and board." It was less than she would have made as a teacher, but it was honest work and a roof over her head. Josephine accepted with gratitude. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Josephine rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the guests. She learned to make enormous batches of biscuits under Sarah's patient guidance, to brew coffee strong enough to satisfy Western tastes, and to turn whatever the local hunters brought in into hearty stews that would stick to a working man's ribs. Between meals, she cleaned rooms, changed linens, and gradually began to take over some of the bookkeeping that Mrs. Tillman had previously handled herself. The work was exhausting but satisfying in its concreteness. Each night, Josephine fell into bed with aching muscles but a quieter mind. Sarah became a fast friend, her practical nature and ready laugh a balm to Josephine's wounded spirit. She shared stories of growing up in the territory with her brother, of their parents who had died of fever when Sarah was 16 and Owen 21. Owen kept the ranch going and made sure I finished my schooling, Sarah told her as they kneaded dough one morning. Worked himself to the bone, could have sold up after Ma and Pa died, but that land meant everything to them. Now it's everything to him. He seems very kind, Josephine ventured. Sarah's smile was knowing. He is, too kind sometimes, takes in every stray animal and hard luck case that crosses his path, but he's also the most stubborn man God ever put on this earth once he makes up his mind about something. Sunday came, and with it, Owen Riley. He arrived at the inn bearing a sack of apples and a side of venison that made Sarah clap her hands in delight. "Mrs. Tillman will be pleased," she said, taking the meat. "We've got a full house this week with the cattle buyers in town." Owen removed his hat as he entered the kitchen, nodding a greeting to Josephine, who was elbow-deep in dishwater. "Miss Dawson, settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you." She wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after a morning of hard work. "Your sister has been very kind. Sarah's good that way, takes after our mother." His gaze lingered on her face, and Josephine felt a warmth creep into her cheeks that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Stop staring at the poor girl, Owen, and make yourself useful." "Dinner won't be ready for an hour yet." Owen cleared his throat and turned his attention to his sister. "I'll go check on Thunder. That new shoe was giving him trouble on the ride-in." After he left, Sarah gave Josephine a speculative look. "My brother doesn't usually notice pretty girls." "Too busy with his cattle and horses." "I'm sure he was just being polite," Josephine protested, though the memory of his steady gaze made her pulse quicken. Hum. Sarah's tone was skeptical, but she let the subject drop, turning instead to preparations for dinner. The meal was a pleasant affair, with Mrs. Tillman joining them in the kitchen rather than the dining room where the paying guests ate. The conversation flowed easily, touching on town news, the price of cattle, and the progress of Owen's apple orchard. "Started it as an experiment 5 years ago," he explained when Josephine expressed surprise that apples grew so well in the territory. "Everyone said it couldn't be done, but I found a sheltered spot with good soil. Now I have 20 trees bearing fruit." "Owen's always been one to prove people wrong," Sarah added fondly. As the meal drew to a close, Owen turned to Josephine. "I understand you're educated, Miss Dawson. Were you planning to teach here?" The direct question caught her off guard. "Yes. I received a letter offering me the position, but when I arrived..." "The position was filled," Mrs. Tillman finished for her, her expression sour. "Hollins and his promises. Not the first time, won't be the last," Owen frowned. "It's not right bringing someone all this way on false pretenses." "It's done now," Josephine said quietly, "and I'm grateful for the work here, still." Owen's jaw set in a stubborn line. "You were qualified, have teaching experience." "I tutored in Philadelphia for several years, yes." Owen and Sarah exchanged a look that Josephine couldn't interpret. Then Owen stood, reaching for his hat. "I should be getting back. Got a new hand who's still learning the ropes." He thanked Mrs. Tillman for the meal, promised Sarah he'd return the following Sunday, and nodded to Josephine. "Miss Dawson, good to see you settling in." After he left, Josephine helped clear the table, aware of Sarah watching her with a thoughtful expression. But whatever was on the other woman's mind, she kept it to herself. The weeks passed, and September brought cooler temperatures and spectacular sunsets that painted the Montana sky in shades of orange and purple. Josephine found herself looking forward to Sundays, when Owen would arrive with whatever bounty his ranch had produced that week: apples, venison, occasionally fresh trout from the stream that ran through his property. Each visit, he seemed to linger a little longer, often finding excuses to remain in the kitchen while Josephine and Sarah worked. He asked about her life in Philadelphia, careful not to pry too deeply, and shared stories of his own experiences carving a ranch out of the untamed wilderness. "It wasn't much when my pa first staked his claim," he told her one evening as he helped her shell peas on the inn's back porch. "Just a cabin and a dream, really. Now we've got nearly 200 head of cattle, 30 horses, and that orchard." You must be very proud, Josephine said, admiring the quiet satisfaction in his voice. Proud isn't the word, grateful maybe. The land gives back what you put into it if you treat it right. He glanced at her, then back at the peas in his hands. You ever think about staying in Wallace? Permanently, I mean. The question took her by surprise. I haven't thought that far ahead. When I came, I thought I'd be teaching. Now. She trailed off, unwilling to admit that she still checked the post office weekly for a letter from Richard that never came. You'd make a fine teacher, Owen said. Better than that Harper fellow they've got now. Half the town's children can barely write their names from what I hear. Before Josephine could respond, Sarah appeared at the door. Owen, Mr. Jenkins is here. Says one of your hands got thrown from a horse and they need you back at the ranch. Owen rose immediately, concern etching his features. I'll head right out, sorry to cut the visit short. As he strode away, Josephine felt a strange emptiness, as if something important had been interrupted before it could fully form. October brought an unexpected visitor to Wallace. Josephine was sweeping the inn's front porch when a well-dressed gentleman approached, his city clothes and polished boots marking him as an outsider as surely as Josephine's Eastern accent had marked her weeks before. Excuse me, he said, removing his hat to reveal fair hair slicked back with pomade. I'm looking for Miss Josephine Dawson. Josephine's heart stuttered. I'm Josephine Dawson. The man's smile was both charming and calculated. James Blackwell, attorney at law from Helena. May we speak privately? I have a matter of some importance to discuss with you. Mrs. Tillman allowed them use of the inn's small private dining room, bringing coffee before discreetly withdrawing. Mr. Blackwell wasted no time getting to the point. I represent Richard Covington, he said, watching Josephine's face closely. He asked me to find you and deliver a message. Josephine's hands trembled around her coffee cup. You've seen Richard, is he well? Quite well. He's settled in Helena now, establishing a law practice. Blackwell cleared his throat. He wanted me to express his deepest regrets, but he won't be joining you in Wallace as planned. Though she had suspected as much for weeks, the confirmation still stung. I see. There's more, Miss Dawson. Mr. Covington has recently become engaged to Miss Eleanor Whitfield of Helena. Her father is a territorial judge. Blackwell had the grace to look uncomfortable. He asked me to return this to you. He placed a small velvet box on the table. Inside was the modest pearl ring Richard had given her before she left Philadelphia, promising it was a placeholder until he could afford a proper diamond. Josephine closed the box with a snap. Thank you for delivering it, Mr. Blackwell. There's one more thing. He withdrew an envelope from his jacket. A bank draft for $50. Mr. Covington feels responsible for your situation and wishes to provide some compensation. Pride surged through Josephine, hot and fierce. You may tell Mr. Covington that I am not in need of his charity. I have employment and am quite capable of supporting myself. Blackwell looked surprised, then relieved. As you wish, Miss Dawson. I'll be returning to Helena tomorrow if you change your mind. After he left, Josephine sat alone in the dining room, the velvet box a small, accusing weight before her. She had come west on the strength of two promises, one from Wallace for employment, one from Richard for marriage. Both had proven false. The door opened and Sarah entered, her face full of concern. Josephine, Mrs. Tillman said you had a visitor from Helena. Josephine nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Sarah sat beside her, taking her hands. Bad news. The man I thought I would marry has found someone else. The words came out flat and hollow. The daughter of a judge, more suitable, I imagine, than a woman whose family lost everything in a banking scandal. Oh, Josephine, Sarah squeezed her hands. I'm so sorry. The worst part is, I think I've known for weeks. I just didn't want to admit it. She gave a humorless laugh. I seem to have a talent for believing promises that people never intended to keep. Not everyone breaks their promises, Sarah said quietly. Some people still believe a word given is a bond. Josephine thought of Owen Riley, who came every Sunday without fail, who brought gifts from his ranch not as charity but as a way of sharing his bounty, who looked at her with eyes that asked for nothing but gave everything. I know, she whispered. I'm beginning to see that. That evening, Josephine wrote a letter to her aunt in Philadelphia, the only family member who had stood by her after her father's disgrace and subsequent death. She described Wallace, her work at the inn, and for the first time mentioned Owen Riley. Writing his name felt significant somehow, as if she were acknowledging something she had been trying to ignore. She did not mention Richard's message. That chapter was closed now, the pages torn out and scattered like the Wallace Town Council letter she had destroyed on her first night at the inn. Sunday arrived with a crisp clarity that heralded the approaching winter. Josephine found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her hair with the tortoiseshell combs her mother had given her for her 18th birthday, one of the few fine things she still possessed. Owen arrived earlier than usual, and there was a nervous energy about him that Josephine hadn't seen before. He handed Sarah a basket of late apples and a jar of honey from his hives, then turned to Josephine. "Miss Dawson, I was hoping you might join me for a ride this afternoon. There's something I'd like to show you." Sarah raised her eyebrows but said nothing, busying herself with the apples. "I'd like that," Josephine replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice when her heart was racing. "If Mrs. Tillman can spare me." "Already asked her," Owen admitted. "She said you've earned an afternoon off." An hour later, Josephine found herself on the back of a gentle mare named Daisy, following Owen along a winding trail that led away from town. She was wearing a borrowed riding skirt of Sarah's, slightly too short but serviceable, and a warm jacket against the October chill. "Not much further," Owen called back to her. "How are you doing?" "Fine," she answered truthfully. Although she hadn't ridden in years, the skill had come back to her quickly, and there was a freedom in the motion that she had forgotten. They crested a small rise, and Owen reined in his horse, waiting for her to join him. Below them stretched a valley, golden with autumn grasses, a silver ribbon of stream cutting through it. On the far side, a stand of pine trees sheltered a small structure, a cabin, Josephine realized, smoke curling from its chimney. "My ranch," Owen said, a note of pride in his voice. 200 acres, most of it good grazing land. The cabin's not much, but I've been adding to it over the years. "It's beautiful," Josephine said, meaning it. The valley had a peaceful quality, a sense of belonging to the larger landscape rather than being carved out of it. They rode down into the valley, where Josephine could see cattle grazing in the distance and horses in a corral near the cabin. A tall man emerged as they approached, raising a hand in greeting. "That's Jenkins, my foreman," Owen explained. "Been with me since my pa died." Jenkins helped Josephine dismount, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Dawson. Sarah's told us all about you." "Has she?" Josephine glanced at Owen, who looked slightly embarrassed. "My sister talks too much," he muttered. Then more loudly, "Jenkins, we'll be back in a bit. Just wanted to show Miss Dawson the orchard." The apple orchard was tucked into a sheltered fold of land near the stream, the trees now mostly bare of fruit, but still impressive with their spreading branches. Owen walked beside Josephine, pointing out different varieties he had planted. "Most folks said fruit trees wouldn't survive the winters here," he told her. "But I found these hardier types, and this spot is protected from the worst of the weather." "You proved them wrong," Josephine said, remembering Sarah's words about her brother. Owen smiled. "Sometimes that's reason enough to try something." They continued walking, eventually reaching a small rise overlooking both the orchard and the cabin. Owen stopped, removing his hat and turning it in his hands in an uncharacteristically uncertain gesture. "Miss Dawson, Josephine, I brought you out here for a reason." She looked at him, taking in the strong lines of his face softened by earnest eyes. "Yes, I heard about your visitor from Helena." At her surprised expression, he added quickly, "Wallace is a small town and people talk." "I'm sorry if that brings you pain." "It doesn't, not anymore," she said truthfully. "It was a promise that would have been broken eventually, one way or another." Owen nodded slowly. "Some promises shouldn't be made unless they can be kept." He drew a deep breath. "Josephine, I know you came west expecting one kind of life and found another. I know you're educated and refined in ways that I'm not. But I've watched you these past weeks, how you've adapted, how you've worked without complaint, how you've brought something special to a place that can be harsh and unforgiving." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. What I can offer is simple but real, a life built on honest work, mutual respect, and if you'll allow it, a deep affection that I believe could grow into something more. Josephine's heart pounded in her chest. Owen, what are you saying? I'm asking if you might consider staying in Wallace, not at the inn, but here with me. His voice dropped lower. Not right away. I know we're still getting to know each other, but I wanted you to see the ranch to understand what kind of life it might be. Josephine looked around at the valley spread before them, golden in the afternoon light. It was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself in Philadelphia, nothing like the future she had planned when she boarded the stagecoach east. And yet, the cabin has 3 rooms now, Owen continued, words coming faster as if he feared losing courage. I've been adding to it each year. The east room gets the morning light. It would make a fine classroom. A classroom? Owen's expression was earnest. There are 7 children on neighboring ranches who have no schooling. Their parents have asked before, but there was no teacher willing to come this far from town. If you were to live here, as my wife, you could teach them. I'd build proper desks, get books from Helena. The thought caught at Josephine's heart, a small school, children eager to learn, a purpose that went beyond survival. You've given this considerable thought. I have, Owen admitted. Since the first Sunday when you asked about the orchard and listened like what I said mattered. Josephine thought of Richard's broken promises, of the town council's empty words. Then she thought of Owen Riley, who had never offered her anything he couldn't deliver, who had helped her without expectation, whose steadfast presence had become the foundation upon which she was rebuilding her life. I'm not asking for an answer today, Owen said quickly. Just for you to consider it. Josephine stepped forward and with a boldness that surprised her, placed her hand on his arm. I would like very much to consider it, Owen, and I'd like to see more of your ranch if you're willing to show me. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. I'd like nothing better. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the ranch, the barn with its sweet smell of hay, the corral where 2 new colts frolicked under their mother's watchful eyes, the vegetative garden that supplied the kitchen. Owen spoke of his plans for the future: more fruit trees, perhaps some sheep on the higher ground, improvements to the cabin throughout it all. Josephine found herself not just listening but contributing, suggesting, imagining herself as part of this place. By the time they returned to town in the gathering dusk, something had shifted between them. A possibility had become a probability, a hope had become a plan. At the inn door, Owen took her hand, his touch warm and sure. Sunday dinner as usual? Yes, Josephine said, I'll be here. As autumn deepened into winter, Josephine found herself drawn more completely into the rhythms of life in Wallace. The inn was busier than ever as travelers sought shelter from the increasingly harsh weather, and she worked long hours alongside Sarah and Mrs. Tillman. But each Sunday brought Owen, sometimes snow-dusted and red-cheeked from the ride to town, always with that same steady presence that had come to mean safety and possibility to Josephine. They spoke of the future with increasing certainty: the spring wedding they were planning, the improvements to the ranch house that Owen was making through the winter, the small school that would open once the snow melted and children could travel safely again. I've ordered books from Helena, Owen told her one Sunday in late November. McGuffey readers, arithmetic primers, even some history and science texts. Jenkins thinks I've lost my mind, spending good money on books when we could use another breeding bull. And what did you tell him? Josephine asked, already knowing the answer. That some investments yield returns that can't be measured in cattle. Owen's smile was warm. Jenkins has 2 boys of his own who can barely write their names. He'll come around when he sees them learning. December brought a letter from Josephine's aunt in Philadelphia, responding to the news of her engagement with cautious happiness, and a small package containing her mother's gold locket, a family heirloom that her aunt had managed to keep from the creditors after her father's death. Something old for your wedding day, the letter read. Your mother would want you to have it. Josephine showed the locket to Owen that Sunday, sitting beside him on the inn's back porch despite the cold, a blanket draped around their shoulders. It's beautiful, he said, touching the delicate engraving, Like you, Josephine felt a blush warm her cheeks. Owen Riley, I do believe you're becoming a flatterer, not flattery if it's true. He slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her closer. Sarah says you've been setting aside part of your wages each week. For my trousseau, Josephine admitted. It won't be much, but I want to bring something to our marriage besides the clothes on my back. Owen's expression grew serious. Josephine, you know that doesn't matter to me. What you bring is yourself, your mind, your heart, your strength. I've seen how hard you work, how you've adapted to a life that must be so different from what you knew. It is different, she agreed, but better in ways I never expected. She turned to face him more fully. I came west on the promise of a teaching position that didn't exist and a marriage proposal from a man who didn't mean it. I arrived with nothing but broken promises, and then I met you. Owen's eyes softened. And what did I offer you? Something real, Josephine whispered, the words coming from the deepest part of her heart. A future built on truth and hard work and… She hesitated, then found her courage. And love, because I do love you, Owen Riley, in a way I never thought possible. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as she responded, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally drew apart, his expression was one of wonder. I've loved you since that first day, he confessed. Standing in the dust with your carpet bag, looking like you'd fight the whole territory if you had to. Josephine laughed softly. I might have tried. I'd have put my money on you winning, Owen said, his smile returning. Then, more seriously, spring seems a long way off for our wedding. It does, Josephine agreed, a new boldness in her voice. Perhaps we needn't wait quite that long. Christmas is coming after all. Owen's eyebrows rose. Christmas, that's less than 3 weeks away. Too soon, she challenged. His answer was another kiss, this one leaving no doubt as to his thoughts on the matter. The wedding took place in Wallace's small church on Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside the windows and pine boughs decorating the simple altar. Sarah stood as Josephine's attendant, her face shining with happiness. Mrs. Tillman had closed the inn for the day, declaring that a wedding was more important than business, and the entire town seemed to agree, filling the church to capacity. Josephine wore a dress of deep blue wool that she and Sarah had worked on in secret, adorned with her mother's locket. Owen, standing tall and proud at the altar, wore a new shirt and his best trousers, his hair freshly trimmed and his face clean-shaven for the occasion. The minister spoke of commitment and faith, of building a life together through good times and hard. As Josephine and Owen exchanged their vows, she thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, the heartbreak and disappointment that had ultimately led her to a happiness more profound than she had ever imagined. I, Owen, take you, Josephine. His voice rang clear and true. To be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it was her turn, Josephine spoke the traditional words, but in her heart, she added her own promise to build something real and lasting with this man who had offered her not empty words but a life of purpose and love. I now pronounce you man and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss the bride. Owen's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, and when they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Riley, Josephine felt a sense of rightness that settled deep in her soul. The celebration afterward was held at the inn, where Mrs. Tillman had outdone herself preparing a feast. There was music from a fiddle player and an accordion, dancing that grew increasingly lively as the evening progressed, and toasts to the happiness of the new couple. To Owen and Josephine, Sarah raised her glass, her eyes suspiciously bright. May your life together be as strong and true as you both are. Later, as they prepared to leave for the ranch in a wagon Owen had lined with heated bricks and blankets against the cold, Sarah embraced Josephine tightly. I always wanted a sister, she whispered. Now I have one. The ride to the ranch was cold but beautiful, the full moon turning the snow-covered landscape to silver. Owen kept one arm around Josephine, the other guiding the team of horses along the familiar path. Happy, Mrs. Riley? He asked as the cabin came into view, lamplight glowing in the windows where Jenkins had prepared for their arrival. More than I can say, Josephine answered, knowing it was true. The cabin had been transformed in the weeks since she had last seen it. Owen had added curtains to the windows, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and bookshelves along one wall of what would become her schoolroom. On the table sat a small Christmas tree decorated with paper stars and candles, and beneath it, a package wrapped in brown paper. "Your Christmas gift," Owen explained, helping her remove her coat. "Though I think I received the greater gift today." Josephine unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of pencils. "For your thoughts," Owen said. "And for planning your lessons when the school opens." She traced the soft leather cover with her fingers. "It's perfect, but I'm afraid your gift will have to wait until morning. It's still at the in a watch chain I've been saving for." "I don't need gifts," Owen said, drawing her into his arms. "I have everything I want right here." The winter passed in a blur of happiness for Josephine. The ranch house became a home under her care, and she spent hours preparing for the school that would open in the spring. Owen worked alongside his men, coming home each evening tired but satisfied, his face lighting up when he saw her waiting. They developed rituals and routines, coffee by the fire before dawn, Owen reading aloud from one of the books Josephine had brought from Philadelphia while she mended or knitted in the evenings, Sunday visits to town to see Sarah and attend church. Small moments that built upon each other, creating a foundation of shared experience and deepening affection. February brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for nearly 2 weeks. Josephine discovered a talent for bread making that earned her high praise from Jenkins and the other hands, who ate in the main house when the weather was too severe for them to return to the bunkhouse. "Never had better," Jenkins declared, accepting a second slice with butter and honey. "The boss struck gold when he found you, Mrs. Riley." Owen's proud smile warmed Josephine more than the blazing fire. In March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of green appeared in the valley, Owen and his men built the schoolhouse, a simple structure near the main house with wide windows to catch the light and a bell on the roof to call the children to their lessons. 7 students to start, Josephine said, surveying the room with its new desks and the chalkboard Owen had ordered from Helena. "Ages 6 to 14. 7 for now," Owen agreed, his arm around her waist, "but families have a way of growing out here." Josephine looked up at him, reading the question in his eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "families do grow." His smile was all the answer she needed. April brought the opening of the Riley School as it came to be known. Children arrived on horseback or in wagons, their faces curious and sometimes wary, clutching their new books and slates. Josephine welcomed them with a calm confidence that belied her racing heart, and by midday, the schoolhouse rang with recitations and the scratch of chalk. Owen watched from the doorway during the noon break, his expression a mixture of pride and awe. "You were born for this," he told her later. "Those children are lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Josephine replied. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. Now I can't imagine any other." May brought Josephine's certainty that their family would indeed be growing. She told Owen on a Sunday evening as they walked through the orchard, now fragrant with blossoms that promised a bountiful harvest. His whoop of joy startled the birds from the trees, and he lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace before setting her down with sudden concern. "Should I not have done that? Will it harm the baby?" Josephine laughed, her happiness bubbling over. "The baby is fine, Owen. It's early days, yet the little one won't join us until November." "A winter baby," Owen said, placing a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "We'll keep you both warm and safe, I promise." And this, Josephine knew, was a promise that would be kept. The summer passed in a haze of contentment. Josephine continued teaching until the term ended in late June, then turned her attention to preserving the garden's bounty for the coming winter. Her body changed gradually, the curve of her stomach a visible sign of the new life growing within. Owen became, if possible, even more attentive, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day and bringing her wild strawberries he found on his rides around the property. Jenkins and the other hands treated her with a gruff deference that made her smile, and Sarah visited often, bringing baby clothes she had sewn and advice gleaned from her friends with children. In September, a letter arrived from Philadelphia Josephine's aunt announcing her intention to visit in the spring. "I must see for myself this paradise you've described," she wrote, "and meet the man who has brought such happiness to my dear niece. Will she approve of me, do you think?" Owen asked that night, a rare note of uncertainty in his voice. A rough rancher with dirt under his fingernails and not much education, Josephine, sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, her sewing in her lap, looked at him with all the love in her heart. "She will see what I see, a man of integrity and kindness, who works hard and keeps his promises, who has created a life of purpose and beauty in this wild place." Owen knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I thank God every day that you got off that stagecoach in Wallace. Even though I arrived with nothing but broken promises." It was a gentle tease now, the pain of that day long healed. "Especially because of that," Owen said, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "It meant you were free to accept what I could offer." "Something real," Josephine whispered, leaning forward to kiss him, her rounded belly pressing against him. Beneath her heart their child stirred as if in agreement. November brought early snow and with it their son. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Sarah and Mrs. Tillman attending alongside the doctor who had ridden out from Wallace at the first sign that the baby was coming. "A fine boy," the doctor announced, placing the red-faced, squalling infant in Owen's arms while Sarah tended to Josephine. "Strong lungs on him." Owen looked down at his son with wonder before bringing him to Josephine. "He's perfect," he whispered, tears tracking unashamedly down his face. "Like his mother." They named him Thomas James Riley, after Owen's father and Josephine's. He had Owen's dark hair and Josephine's blue eyes, and a temperament that Jenkins declared was calm like his pa but stubborn like his ma. The winter passed in a cocoon of new parenthood. Josephine found unexpected joy in the quiet hours of nursing by the fire while snow fell outside. Owen reading aloud, or simply watching them with a contentment that matched her own. Thomas thrived, growing stronger each day, his personality emerging in small ways, his serious expression as he studied his hands, his toothless smile when Owen sang to him. Spring brought Josephine's aunt as promised, a tiny, formidable woman who arrived in Wallace with trunks containing, among other things, a silver tea service that had belonged to Josephine's grandmother. "One should maintain standards, even in the wilderness," she declared. But her stiff manner melted at the sight of Thomas, and by the end of her first day at the ranch, she was completely won over by both the baby and his father. "You've done well, my dear," she told Josephine privately. "Your mother would be proud, your father too, though he might not understand this life you've chosen." "Are you shocked by it?" Josephine asked. "It's so different from Philadelphia." Her aunt considered this, looking out the window at the valley where cattle grazed peacefully and the schoolhouse stood ready for the new term. "Surprised, perhaps, but not shocked. You were always more adventurous than your circumstances allowed. And your Mr. Riley is a good man, anyone can see that." "The best of men," Josephine agreed. Summer brought a bountiful harvest from the garden and orchard, and autumn saw Thomas taking his first tottering steps across the cabin floor, falling into Owen's waiting arms with a shriek of triumph. "He'll be riding before we know it," Owen predicted, swinging the boy up onto his shoulders. "Not too soon, I hope," Josephine said, but she was smiling. This was the life they were building together, a life of work and purpose, of family and community, of promises made and kept. On a crisp December day, with Thomas napping under Sarah's watchful eye, Owen took Josephine for a ride to the spot where he had first shown her the ranch, now their home for more than a year. The valley spread before them, the cabin now expanded with a new room for Thomas and another for the child they hoped would join their family in the future. The schoolhouse where 8 children now learned their letters and numbers, the orchard bare of leaves but promising next year's fruit. "Happy?" Owen asked, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night. Josephine looked at the man beside her, strong and steadfast, his eyes still holding that same warm light that had first drawn her to him. She thought of the broken promises that had brought her west, and how those shattered dreams had led her to something far more precious and real. "Completely," she answered, her heart full. This is where I belong, Owen, with you, with Thomas, with the life we're building. It's more than happiness, it's home. His kiss tasted of promise, not the fragile kind she had once believed in, but the enduring kind, built day by day through actions rather than words. As they rode back toward the cabin where their son slept and their future waited, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginnings, led exactly where they were meant to. She had arrived in Wallace with nothing but broken promises, her hopes as insubstantial as the dust of the road. But Owen Riley had offered her something real, a love that had only deepened with time, a family that was growing, a purpose that fulfilled her, a home where she truly belonged. And in accepting that offer, Josephine had found not just the happiness she sought, but the kind of joy she had never known to seek, deep-rooted and enduring, like the apple trees in the orchard that bloomed each spring against all odds, in this wild and beautiful place they called home.